Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another Star Wars video. So when George Lucas was making Revenge of the Sith, Ahsoka Tano didn't exist as a character yet. The movie was released in 2005, and Ahsoka wasn't introduced until the 2008 Clone Wars movie and subsequent TV show. The character of Ahsoka was developed by both George Lucas and Dave Filoni, and was created after the prequel films were completed. When Revenge of the Sith was being made, the priority was to show the downfall of Anakin Skywalker and to show his turn to Darth Vader. The concept of Anakin having a Padawan was introduced later into Star Wars canon, and in-universe, Ahsoka's absence is explained by the events of the Clone Wars show. Ahsoka abandoned the Jedi Order near the end of Season 5, after being falsely accused of the attack on the Jedi Temple and becoming disillusioned with the Jedi Council who didn't trust her. But of course, as we know from the Clone Wars Season 7, adjacent to the events of Revenge of the Sith, Ahsoka was involved in the Siege of Mandalore near the end of the war. But some Star Wars fans are convinced a minor detail from the final installment of George Lucas's prequel trilogy could be used to retcon Ahsoka into the film, after Obi-Wan goes to Utapau, and before Anakin speaks to Palpatine and finds out he's a Sith. We have the famous scene between Anakin and Padme, where he tells her he's not the Jedi he should be. At the start of the scene, Anakin is sat down on the couch and using a view screen device, and for years, it's confused Star Wars fans what he's looking at. He then puts it down when Padme walks in. Well, it turns out, according to the Episode 3 visual guide, this device is Obi-Wan's view screen, and it's described as an encoding selector for 9 to 13 emergency transmissions. It's essentially the Star Wars equivalent of checking his phone, seeing if he had any important messages or missed calls. And some Star Wars fans think that Disney could retcon this to be Anakin checking in on Ahsoka's progress on Mandalore. But there is just one problem with this. In the World Between Worlds in Ahsoka Season 1, Anakin didn't recognize the Siege of Mandalore. But you could argue it's just because he didn't recognize it visually because he wasn't there. But we know he knew about it. Any updates on his view screen could have just been a report in figures and maps on a databank. And so maybe Anakin was keeping track of her progress. Ever since the Clone Wars Season 7 came out, fans have been trying to find insertions in Revenge of the Sith where we know about Ahsoka's activities. Much of the events of Mandalore take place concurrent to the first half of the movie, and someone's actually gone and made a timeline for the canonical events of the Clone Wars Season 7 and Revenge of the Sith. It's actually quite fascinating the way it lines up with the movie. 48 hours before the start of Revenge of the Sith, Ahsoka leaves the Martez sisters, Season 7, Episode 8. 28 hours before Episode 3, the kidnapping of Chancellor Palpatine. And then it's 24 hours before Revenge of the Sith, Anakin and Ahsoka have their reunion. Season 7, Episode 9, Old Friends Not Forgotten. And then, 22 hours before Revenge of the Sith, the Siege of Mandalore begins. But one of the most defining moments the Clone Wars Season 7 gave us was Ahsoka's experience of Order 66. I believe the animated show handled this with perfection. It was on the Republic ship after capturing Maul, and the way they intertwined it with her experiencing a disturbance in the Force of what was going on with Anakin was so dark. She sensed that something was wrong. She narrowly escaped her clone troopers and managed to successfully remove Rex's chip. And to be honest, even though Ahsoka wasn't physically in Revenge of the Sith, we now know the importance of her actions during that time. But what is most interesting is the events of the Clone Wars Season 7 retcon the Ahsoka novel by E.K. Johnston, specifically in the way Ahsoka experienced Order 66. Prior to the final season, the only real information about Ahsoka's role in the Siege of Mandalore and what followed came from that novel in 2016. According to the novel, Ahsoka's battle with Maul ends with her trapping the former Sith inside a ray shield. Soon after, while Ahsoka and Rex are still on Mandalore, Order 66 is given, and the clones turn on Ahsoka except for Rex, who originally had his chip removed before the order was given, following the events of what happened with Fives. Together with Rex on her side, they manage to fight off the clones and escape, but in order to disappear, Ahsoka and Rex fake their deaths. They dig false graves, using another clone's body for Rex, and Ahsoka, just like in the Clone Wars, leaves behind her lightsabers. So the setting is different. It wasn't on the Tribunal Venator-class Star Destroyer, like in the show. And Rex doesn't have the same emotional moment where he's influenced by the chip and experiences a tragic conflict of loyalty. I'm usually critical of retcons, but this is one that made more sense. I love the way the show handled it, and us the audience being able to hear the events of Revenge of the Sith through a disturbance in the Force in Ahsoka's head. That was such a clever touch. And the epilogue adds an even darker twist to Revenge of the Sith. Ahsoka escapes and fakes her death, and to do this, she decides to leave behind her 2 lightsabers at a makeshift gravesite, where she and Captain Rex buried the fallen clones. Later, when Vader arrives on the planet, now covered in snow, he discovers one of Ahsoka's lightsabers. The scene is brief, but laden with emotional symbolism and poignance. The lightsabers were not just her weapons, they were symbols of her journey as a Jedi. When Anakin first gifted Ahsoka these lightsabers, they represented his mentorship and her growth as a Jedi Knight. But leaving them behind, Ahsoka was severing ties to her past, something that would come back to haunt her for years to come, as we see in Star Wars Rebels, where she can't accept Anakin's fate, and then in Ahsoka Season 1, where during the New Republic, decades down the line, she can finally come to terms with the truth. But in the moment, in the wake of the end of the war, as we know, she attended Padme's funeral, got in contact with Bail Organa, and was involved as fulcrum for the rebel cause. But when you watch Revenge of the Sith, and then the Clone Wars epilogue, you get a real sense of the sadness of what Ahsoka's master had become and what was lost. When Vader finds one of the lightsabers, it triggers memories of his past and his deep bond with his former Padawan. Finding her lightsaber might have reminded him in that moment of the person he once was, before his fall to the dark side. Further down the line, from an audience perspective, we feel a very similar thing when watching Twilight of the Apprentice, where Ahsoka faces Vader head-on. In the cold and bitter snow, it's difficult to fathom what Vader was thinking when he assumed Ahsoka had died. It may have brought with it a twisted sense of closure, but for us the audience, it was layered with irony because we knew she was still alive. It emphasizes the theme of survival and resistance. It further reminded us that Ahsoka had been through so much, and there were times, as I say in the Rebels Season 2 finale, where you get a sense that maybe Anakin felt some pain when he was fighting her. When you think about Star Wars comics, Vader is often portrayed as being haunted by his past, including his relationships with people like Padme and his mother. His inability to fully let go of those he lost makes him such a tragic figure in the Star Wars galaxy. His pain was fueled by loss and the betrayal he felt. And relating it back to Ahsoka, I wonder if Vader ever thought of her, and I'm looking forward to the conversations between the 2 characters in Ahsoka Season 2, Anakin's Force Ghost, and an enlightened Ahsoka. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, check me out on socials, and may the Force be with you, always.